Hey y'all! Canine Cryptids, a broad category of mysterious creatures who have dog-like features, have been on record as having been spotted for thousands of years. With some variants being given more specific titles such as Hell Hound, Werewolf, or Dogman, these beasts are enigmatic and sometimes believed to be a messenger from hell itself. The stories I have for you today are a compilation of real-life experiences with these creatures. I'm Candace, and I'll be your guide. My wife and I are both sensitive to energies that most people around us are not. We've each had our share of far-out paranormal encounters separately, and since we've been together, it's been one hell of a ride that just seems to get more far out as time goes. Backstory. While we were building our house, we were living in a large wall tent on our property. It was pretty large for a tent, almost 400 square feet, so you could easily walk around in it. It had our full-size bed on a bed frame in there, a kitchen area, and a table with several chairs. It even had a canvas drop cloth as a floor so we wouldn't be walking around in the dirt. And I had the sides folded in and weighted down all the way around, as well as staked down to keep any critters out. Apart from a couple flies and one or two spiders, it did the trick. At the time, I was doing some freelance handyman repair type work during the day and building our house in the evenings. And on the day of this incident, I was just finishing up work on a house that had bad juju written all over it. I could feel the negative energy from the curb the first time I pulled up to the house to meet the owner. And walking through the door, the feeling intensified. But it wasn't absolutely overwhelming, and what can I say? We really needed the money. I had lost a part of my thumb a week earlier in an accident working on the house. I had an upcoming surgery to get it stitched up and go get the bone properly covered, and we didn't have insurance. Money was more than tight. Besides, I felt comfortable in my abilities to keep the negative energy at bay while I did whatever work had to be done and then get the hell out of there. Anyways, after a couple of weeks working there, and by the way, no one was living there at the time, the regular things that you would expect to happen in a high-energy place happened. Lights flipping back on right after I would turn them off, doors slamming shut right behind me while I'm walking down the hallway, or opening for me as I'm reaching for them. The kind of stuff that's pretty much just meant to get a rise out of you, and the more I played it cool, the more intense it got. Eventually, I get to the last day. When over the phone the owner hinted at stiffing me for the bill and I was packing up all my gear, I guess it was evident that I wasn't planning on coming back, because the activity in this house was extremely low, virtually non-existent, except for the same dense negative energy that was always there. But now, more than ever, I felt like I was being watched. Not just watched, but stared at. Like something was focusing on me with everything it had. Everything up until this point had been weird, but it was only your everyday kind of weird. The kind of weird that people who don't want to accept it can still somehow find logical excuses for. The next thing that happened was the first thing in the house that genuinely spooked me. As I walked through the living room to the front door to leave for good, tool bucket in hand, I passed the only hallway in the house on my right. As I looked down the hallway to double check that I had turned off all the lights, I saw something I didn't want to believe. At the end of the hallway, about 20 or 30 feet from me, sat a huge black dog. Its head was following me as I walked past the hallway. When I say huge, I mean massive. Like my head would have fit inside of its mouth. Prior experience with manifestations like that have taught me to give it as little energy as possible, that you're better off acting like you hadn't noticed it. So I continued to walk calmly to the front door, even though every hair on my body was standing on end and my adrenaline was racing. I stopped at the front door inside the house, turned around and addressed the house and everything within it, stating that as I left the house, nothing was welcome to follow me. I drove home, and that was that. I didn't tell my wife because I didn't want to worry her. We had enough going on at the time without bringing up things that I felt I'd already addressed. So fast forward to later that night. My wife and I are fast asleep in bed. I'm torn out of sleep by my wife's terrified gasp. And being in a canvas tent in the middle of nowhere, I was already on edge. In the first split second of being awake, I see my wife sitting upright in our bed, still in the process of gasping, while our dog who'd been sleeping next to her ran, barking and snarling like a lunatic, and jumped off the base of the bed between us and the door. I still hadn't seen what was terrifying them, but I leapt out of the bed while shouting at our dog, "Bed," and landed between the dog and the entrance to our tent. The entrance, which was not only still zipped up and buckled up tight, but staked to the ground in multiple places as well, as I did every night. As my feet hit the ground, I stood almost face to face with a massive black dog. It was sitting in front of the doorway, and as I landed and looked in its eyes, I was filled with nothing short of absolute rage. I love my wife with all of my heart, and here was something dangerous that wasn't welcome in our home, watching us sleep. Immediately, I stepped forward and shouted at it, deep and loud, "Get out!" And as I did so, this thing stands up and steps toward me, and I shout again, this time clapping my hands together as loud and hard as I can, while stepping forward again. Again, this unbelievably massive dog, which is almost face to face with me height-wise, steps forward. At this point, we're maybe 4 feet away from each other. It hasn't ran off, and it's clear that this thing could easily kill us both if I let it. I lunge forward and come down as hard as I can with my right fist aiming to kill it, aiming between the snout and right below the eyes. And just like that, ready to get torn to ribbons by this thing, I go right through it, and it's just gone. I'm completely shocked and spin around to see if somehow it slipped past me to my wife and dog. Then unzip the very bottom of the front of our home, rip the stakes from the earth, and run a few steps out into the night, looking every direction for the thing. The moon is out and I've got excellent night vision, but I can't see any sign of it. Nothing moving, no footsteps in the dark. I can't smell it, nothing. So after a minute, I run back inside to make sure my wife is okay. She's still sitting straight up in the bed, eyes wide open, but she's okay, and the dog is tense as hell. I finally felt my thumb screaming in pain and pouring blood at this point. The bone was still exposed waiting for surgery, and the heavy bandage had gotten knocked at some point. My heart rate is calming down, and I asked her what she saw while I'm trying to stop the bleeding again with paper towels. Now, we're both extremely logical people, despite all of the weird that we've seen. No matter how much paranormal stuff you've seen, you can't fall down the rabbit hole, and it's still safe to assume that the vast majority of the weird things you experience can be explained logically. That's the way we both view it. But when I asked her what she saw, before telling her what I saw, she looked me dead in the eyes and said that it looked like a werewolf was sitting in our doorway watching us. I don't believe in werewolves, but I know for a fact that we both individually identified an unbelievably massive canine in our home, 10 feet from the foot of our bed, and we both saw it vanish into thin air. I know our dog saw something that he identified as a threat. There were no tracks anywhere around our tent the next morning. I looked as soon as the sun came up. Even if there had been tracks, we live in the middle of nowhere. There are no wolves here, but there are occasionally stray dogs and coyotes, but everything's on the small side. The only description that has consistently come to my mind since then has been Hell Hound, but I can't seem to find any similar stories online. A couple years ago, I was driving my girlfriend of the time home late one night. We stopped at an intersection near her neighborhood where I decided to look down to change the song playing on my phone. When I looked back up, I saw a large dog run right in front of my headlights. My girlfriend said, "Whoa, did you see that?" I told her, "Yeah, it was just a dog." "No, that dog looks weird," she said. Right there and then it passed in front of my lights again. I was terrified when I noticed it had no features, but more of like a solid black mass in the shape of a dog. It ran past my window and I noticed it had what seemed like smoke coming off of it. "What the hell is that?" I screamed. It circled around and it went past my girlfriend's window, going directly into my car's beam of lights again. As soon as it cleared them, I floored it and sped off down the street. We both couldn't believe what we had seen. When we got to her house, we sat in the car and tried to process what had happened. But she broke down in tears and revealed to me that an uncle of hers had seen the dog we had just seen shortly before he passed. She said what we had seen was exactly what he had described to her family. He said it felt like death was coming after him. I comforted her as she cried and tried to play tough, but deep down I was absolutely terrified. Was it there for her or for me? A couple weeks later, I was driving alone one night down a dark country road that I would usually cruise on the weekends. Everything was normal when I noticed something moving just out of the beams of the light of the car on the edge of the road as I drove. I slowed down and was shocked to see what was revealed by my headlights. It was that dog again, but this time it was running alongside my car as I drove. I was terrified when I suddenly remembered that the speed limit on this road was 70 miles per hour. This thing was keeping up with me. It was exactly like I'd seen it before, a large black mass with smoke coming off of it. As I glanced back and forth between the road and it, I slammed on the brakes. When I turned to look at it, its head was backward, not turned. And it was looking right at me with glowing white eyes. I've never been more afraid in my whole life. I immediately did a U-turn in the road and hauled my butt back into town. I was shaking the entire way home. Was what I saw a hellhound or something else? Are these things associated with death? My grandfather passed shortly after these events. I've spotted the dog a couple of times while driving since, but only for a brief moment as I passed it. At about 11:05 p.m. that evening, we were driving onto Mud Creek Road, traveling west towards Highway 14 near Troy in Bradford County, Pennsylvania. As we continued down the dark road, our attention was drawn to the left side of the roadway. I was driving and saw some movement and mentioned it to my friend. She initially thought that a naked man was crawling on the side of the road. I decreased my speed, swerved the truck in the middle of the road, and directed the high beams of my headlights toward the creature. I stopped about 30 or 40 feet away. We soon realized that this was not a person, but instead a creature that was crawling very low to the ground. As we watched, the creature moved into a squatting position with its back completely straight, kind of like the stance of a kangaroo. The arms of the creature were held tightly to its body. What looked like long claws that resembled the talons of an eagle were clearly visible. The claws we estimated to be about 8 to 10 inches in length. One claw was shorter than the other three. This creature had a muscular body. The head of the beast appeared to be oversized and shaped like that of a wolf. At the top of its head were two pointed bat-like ears that looked to be about 4 to 6 inches long. The entire creature was covered with dull, wrinkly, dark black skin. We saw large canine-like teeth in its mouth. The eyes of the creature were about the size of silver dollars and were shiny black. Even though I had my high beams directed at the creature, the eyes did not reflect at all. I looked over the body during the 12-second encounter, and for some reason, I felt like the creature should have wings, but it didn't. In the squatted position, this beast seemed to be about 5 feet tall. At this point, the creature was in the left lane of the road and about 1 or 2 feet onto the pavement. As we watched in amazement, the creature began to stretch its body. At this point, the animal started to stand up on its back legs while also falling over onto its front feet. In this position, it seemed to be about 6 or 7 feet tall. Then it fell over on all 4 legs. The front claws of the creature were now 2 feet across the center line of the highway, while the back feet were 1 or 2 feet away from the edge of the road. The creature then turned its head to the right and looked towards our truck. It looked directly at us with a horrific expression, like it was panicked. I saw it take a deep breath. I had the feeling that the creature didn't realize that it was being observed, and when it realized it was kind of like we caught it doing something. Once it realized it was being observed, it leaned back slightly and then reached forward with its claws. The creature then took one tremendous leap and cleared a 7-foot embankment and moved out of sight into a wooded area. That leap was about 40 feet long. As it was in the process of leaping, it was perfectly straight and held its front claws forward. The legs, as it was leaping, were only slightly larger than broomsticks, or about the size of a walking cane, and were very long. Then, just a second after the creature was gone from sight, something else weird occurred. A large bird, maybe an owl, suddenly rushed at the passenger side window, almost hitting the glass, and then took off and didn't come back. It happened so fast we weren't sure if it was an owl or not. Thinking back, the creature appeared to be changing form. Its shape was nothing like when it was squatted. My friend said to me that she also felt like it shaped into another creature. She thought it was a dark brown color and looked like a werewolf with a little back hair. She estimated that when it was leaping into the woods, she thought it stood about 9 feet tall. While reluctant to say it, she said, "I think it was a man changing into a werewolf." After the experience, I went onto the internet to try to figure out what I saw. And the closest way I could describe the creature would be a gargoyle with no wings. I will never forget what we saw that night. I'm a rancher in Oklahoma. Feral hogs are a problem in this area, and one night a friend called me to go pig hunting with them on his friend's field that is getting destroyed by pigs. Here in Oklahoma, it's legal to hunt pigs and coyotes with thermal scopes. Feral pigs are mainly just active at night. We rode by the river, then walked maybe 150 yards and set up behind a fallen log. We sat and waited. It was a beautiful, calm night, and the moonlight made visibility excellent, even without the thermal. After maybe 30 minutes, we heard screaming. It was really loud. We looked at each other thinking it was maybe a cougar, but we couldn't tell exactly where it came from. When we heard a pig squeal to our right, in my head I was thinking a big cat caught a pig. I looked through my thermal and I froze. An 8 to 10 foot tall creature had this pig in its hands. It wasn't a small pig, maybe 200 to 250 pounds, and it was squealing and fighting the strength and size of this thing. It was amazing. It had a long beard, dog-like snout, and it was hairy all over. But in my thermal, the images are white, so as far as the color, I'm not sure. As I was watching this thing, it literally ripped the pig in half with its bare hands, like a sheet of paper, and threw it on the ground. It started walking towards us. I nearly crapped myself. I literally froze. I couldn't pull the trigger. In my mind, I was telling my hand to pull the trigger, but I physically couldn't. Then, all of a sudden, a massive log, maybe 30 feet long, 2 to 3 feet around, flew over the top of us. I jumped and ran. My buddy was right behind me. We got in my ATV, I started it and held my foot to the floor. We were traveling about 60 miles per hour. It'll run 80 miles per hour, but I don't believe it was at top speed yet. We busted through the gate to the pasture. I didn't even have a thought of getting out and opening it. We hit a ditch and went airborne and started to do a front roll, and I was thinking, this is going to hurt. But the next thing I remember, we were sitting still, not moving, and not hurt. We were sitting next to my pickup truck and trailer. What the hell? We loaded it up and went to his house in silence. Not a word was said. We pulled up to his house and went inside. His wife asked, "What's wrong with you guys? You look like you've seen a ghost. Where are your guns?" I said that I think that it can keep the guns. I never even realized our guns were left laying by the stump, but I did not care. I was glad to be out of there. I live about 40 miles from my friend. Now, this is the creepiest part. When I parked the truck and walked to my front door, I noticed something in my yard. About 20 yards from the front door is that same rifle I left down at the river. Holy crap. That thing knows where I live. It's 40 miles away. Nothing has happened since then, but I don't go out at dark unless I absolutely have to, and I haven't been back to that creek or river since, and I don't plan to. But I do feel something unnatural saved us that night. It was July 4th, 2017. I worked in a cafe in town and had to go to work during the holiday. My shift ended around 5 o'clock, and I had plans to go to the Bellevue Cemetery with friends for some peace and quiet. I was tired of all the noise from the day and wasn't interested in the fireworks that night. I met up with everyone outside my house and we picked up some fast food before leaving. There were about 5 of us, and we all started walking down to the cemetery, eating and chatting as we made our way. The cemetery wasn't huge, but it was big enough that we could find a quiet place to sit and hang out for a bit. After we got there, we all settled under a tree. I relaxed and just listened while everyone else was talking. I was still reeling from work and how busy the day was for me. That's when I noticed something moving in the distance behind a few mausoleums. It was dark and I could only make out a shadow. I couldn't tell what I was looking at and figured an animal had come down from the mountain and wandered into town after smelling all the barbecuing. Then I saw whatever it was sprint from behind one mausoleum to the next. It was way too big to be a wolf or a mountain lion, but too fast to be anything large like a bear. It startled me for a minute. I couldn't imagine any animal I could think of being out in the light of day like this. It made me nervous. My friends noticed a change in the look on my face and asked me what was wrong. I didn't want to say I saw a big scary shadow running around the cemetery. I thought they'd make fun of me. So I just shrugged it off and said that it was nothing. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. Right then I saw the figure again. It sprinted back further into the cemetery, this time behind gravestones and then behind a tree. My curiosity got the best of me at this point, and I played it off like I needed to take a walk. I headed off in the direction of the shadow when I saw it take off again. I noticed it had an unbelievably large head. I couldn't tell how tall it was, but I knew it was bigger than any of us. And the quick glance that I got at it reminded me of a man completely covered in hair. I just thought that my mind was playing tricks on me, but I was still curious. I approached the mausoleum that it had been hiding behind. I looked down to be sure not to trip and froze. There in the dirt was an enormous footprint the size of my forearm and complete with claws right there in the soil. I started to panic, a little puzzled by something I didn't yet understand. I'd never heard of a creature with a footprint so big in my whole life. I proceeded with caution towards the tree that it had ducked behind. I just needed to know if I was crazy or if we were actually in danger. I got to the tree and found nothing behind it. No one was crouching or hiding from us. That's when a cluster of leaves fell from the tree above and hit me on their way down. I heard a loud rustling too. There was no breeze. I slowly lifted my head to look up, and there, glaring down at me, was a hideous dog creature with eyes shaped like a human, but amber-colored and terrifyingly piercing. This dog creature was as long as the branch it was laying on, and it slowly growled at me. I ran back to my friends and told them we had to go immediately. They protested at first, but then one of them caught a glimpse of the creature jumping down from the tree. She didn't get a good look at it, only a shadow, and all she could tell was that it was huge. We all grabbed our things and made our way out of the cemetery. The friend that had seen the shadow asked me what it was. I played it off saying I didn't see the shadow, only signs of a coyote circling around, and I felt scared. I didn't describe the dog creature or acknowledge it. I no longer live in the area and haven't heard of any encounters with the dog creature since my encounter. Maybe it went into the mountains and stayed there. Three nights ago, I saw something that I still can't fully understand or explain. I live in mid-Michigan in a small suburban town surrounded by cornfields. However, I do live in the more populated area as my parents' house is located within walking distance of our downtown. Our street is by no means desolate, dark, or isolated, and most of the houses are fairly close to one another. A pretty urban setting given the town itself. It was about 2:30 a.m., and since it's pretty normal for me to be up that late, me and my dog have developed what I call our little routine. He comes to my door, lets out a little huff to inform me that he's there, and then we go downstairs where I let him outside through the front door to do his business. After completing, he comes in and we share a midnight snack of ham straight from the fridge. Now keep in mind, my dog is extremely well trained and very old. He doesn't need a leash or a fence to keep him from running away. He always comes right back after he's done. He'll even wait at the door if you aren't there. So on this particular night, I open the door for him and I'm just about to turn and walk away so I can prepare a midnight snack, when I notice he's still standing on the porch staring across the street. This isn't completely out of the norm for him, but this was lasting a bit longer than usual. When he finally jumps off the porch, I follow his line of sight where he'd been staring, and I see what looks like a large dog, or maybe even a wolf, slinking across my neighbor's yard on the other side of the street. For the first few seconds, I'm trying to figure out what this thing is, because it looks like it could be a dog, but something isn't right. It's too long, and the way it's moving isn't normal. And even though it was only about 50 feet away, it looked almost like it was blurry. I can't think of any other way to describe it. None of it made sense. At this point, I go into panic mode because so far this creature hasn't seemed to notice me or my dog. But if it does, my dog doesn't stand a chance. He's old and also a Pomeranian. Whatever this thing was, it would destroy him, no doubt. I decide to slowly open the outer glass door, hoping to create just enough noise to alert my dog that it's time to come in, but not enough for whatever this thing is to hear me too. Luckily, my dog notices right away and starts running back toward me. But at the same time, this dog creature starts turning toward me, slowly. It almost felt fake how unnatural it moved, like animatronics or something. I'm not even sure what I'm looking at, but I have this indescribable feeling that I'm not supposed to be seeing this. So this thing is turning to look at me. My dog is coming through the door simultaneously, and for about 1 second, I take my eyes off the creature to look down at my dog and close the door. When I look back up, this thing has moved about 30 feet to the left in my neighbor's driveway rather than their yard, and is standing on its hind legs at around 7 or 8 feet tall, staring at me. Now I'm really freaking out. How did it move so quickly, and how did it not make a single sound? How is it so tall? I literally looked away for maybe a second. I look away again to close the door and gather myself, only to look again and see absolutely nothing. It was gone. This whole ordeal lasted maybe 20 or 30 seconds total. Shaking, I give my dog his ham and mine and run downstairs to my brother's room in the basement to tell him what happened. Being a normal 19-year-old guy playing video games, his response was, "Wow, that's super weird." But honestly, I just needed to tell someone to confirm that what just happened actually happened, and that I wouldn't wake up the next day and convince myself it was a dream. Over the last few days, I've told anyone who would listen about what I saw, including my parents. Those who are closer to me seemed a bit more unnerved, because like I mentioned earlier, I don't usually believe in this type of thing. They could tell I was shaken by whatever it was that I saw. Tonight, after some random Googling as the result of my restless mind, I came across what appears to be the exact description of what I saw. The Dogman. I've never heard anything about it before, but I'm now fully convinced that I saw one in front of my very own eyes, and it saw me too. The following incident supposedly occurred in 1977 at an undisclosed location in West Virginia. A boy growing up in a farming community in West Virginia had called his parents to tell them that he was staying at his grandparents'. The witness recalled that his grandfather was agitated about something, and over supper asked him if he saw any strange animals in the area. The witness hadn't, so the grandfather alerted him to the fact that there was a predator on the loose and that he should be cautious. Before bed that same evening, the witness observed his grandfather sitting by the living room window with a gun. The grandfather told him to lock the windows in his room. The witness assumed there was a bear or coyote running around, but the witness went to sleep and was woken up by a sound sometime later. He opened his eyes and looked at the window. He saw nothing. He eventually got up and went into the living room where he saw his grandfather sleeping in a chair by the window, the gun at his side. The witness looked and saw nothing in the window. He then went to get some candy from a bowl in the living room, and that's when he observed a claw coming in through the window, palm facing down, as if it was going to push the window up. The witness clearly saw 3 fingers. The middle finger was the longest. Years later, he claimed the fingers reminded him of the claws of the creature in Krampus. He screamed in fright, which woke up the grandfather. The creature also screamed. The grandfather went into fight mode and proceeded to hit the creature's fingers with his gun. The witness grabbed a knife from nearby and also stabbed at the fingers. At that moment, the grandmother rushed into the room and turned on the outside light, which lit up the yard. The witness could see the creature clearly standing in the window. He even looked into its eyes. The creature took off running just as the grandfather raised his gun to shoot it. According to the witness, it appeared to be angry and was growling as it ran. The witness acknowledged that he'd wet himself during the exchange. At some point, the grandmother stated that the creature had returned. "It's back," she said, which surprised him. They proceeded to tell him that the creature had been seen around the property 3 years earlier, but had left. They assumed it had been killed. It had only started appearing again some 2 weeks earlier. This upset the witness as he'd been playing on the property and he should have been alerted to it. The grandparents told him that in 1974, the grandfather was in a deer stand bow hunting when a strange creature attempted to climb the tree and enter the stand through a door latch. The grandfather shot at it and stabbed at it, but it never stopped coming. Eventually, it attempted to poke its nose through the opening in the stand, and that's when the grandfather stabbed it in the nose. It managed to get a paw through and slashed the leg of the grandfather. The creature fled after that. The scar was visible on the nose of the creature standing at the window. As well, the grandfather also had the scar on his leg. The grandfather claimed he waited in the stand for 3 hours before feeling safe enough to climb down and leave. They had never heard of a Dogman at the time, so they just referred to it as werewolf. Within 2 weeks of the window encounter, numerous farm animals began turning up dead. The grandfather became worried and began driving the grandson to the school bus and picking him up when he returned. 2 weeks later, the witness remembered the grandfather failed to show up. He walked home and saw the truck parked. He assumed the grandfather had simply forgotten, but as he entered the barn, he found the grandfather dead. He'd been killed. The witness could not bring himself to go into detail about it, but he did notify family members. Later, the police determined that he'd been attacked by an unknown animal. Within 2 weeks, the grandmother left the property and never returned. She passed away in 2010, and the state claimed the property for unpaid taxes. Okay, y'all, that's today's stories of Canine Cryptids. Let's talk about it. These stories are interesting because they're all very similar, but with differences or different variations in appearances and manifestations of them. Some seem to be more cryptid in nature, a creature that lives out in the unknown, creeping out from the woods and then returning to them. Whereas other ones, like the black Hell Hound type creature that appeared in the home in the tent, seem more supernatural. I don't think it's a leap to say that the one that had the black smoke coming off of it was also a supernatural type being. It's really interesting how the black dog apparition followed the man back to the tent and vanished when he went to attack it. It also seems odd that it didn't appear again after that. The story about the pig being ripped apart by the big canine creature was terrifying. And then you add in the possible paranormal element of them flipping their ATV and waking up unharmed next to the truck. And then, do we really think the creature brought the gun and returned it? It does seem unlikely that his friend could have dropped it off the house since he wouldn't have been able to beat him back there. Maybe whatever force caused them to be unharmed mysteriously waking up next to the truck caused the gun to appear at home? I don't know. I have so many questions about that one. I saved my favorite story for last, the one where the cryptid may have actually killed Grandpa. Because canine cryptids have been documented for thousands of years, there's so many beliefs, theories, legends behind them. One of which is if you see a Hell Hound, it will cause your death after the third visit. The same legend suggests that it might be one visit and also suggests it might be the third. That one stuck in my mind as I heard this story because although this farmer had seen it an undocumented amount of times previously, we do know that it was more than a couple of times when combined with that encounter in the window. And because the theories and lore on canine cryptids is so varied, there isn't one cohesive idea about who and what they are. The one known as Dogman seems to be the most commonly spoken of, and it's primarily in Michigan and just south throughout Illinois and Ohio, but it's been spotted throughout the US and parts of Canada. Dogman, however, doesn't seem to have a lot distinguishing him from other canine cryptids. He's mostly just described as a large dog that walks upright like a human, but can go down on all fours to run or leap. As always, I want to know what you think. Do you think these are true cryptids, or are these paranormal manifestations of some sort? Do you have a personal theory on what they may be? I'd love to hear it. You can find me on social media at Obscure Appalachia or email me at obscureappalachia@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the podcast and get bonus content, go to patreon.com/obscureappalachia. As always, a big thank you to my patrons and all my listeners. Until next time.